Oh, this is the Corona Shield. We are going to be reading John Henry. That was on one of your assignments. This is Pecos Bill. It is a tall tale. And Pecos Bill didn't actually exist like John Henry did. Pecos Bill is a made-up character, and but it's got a lot of figurative language in it. So I wanted to give you another example of hyperbole. Hyperbole is the extreme exaggerations. Simile is when we compare using like or as. Personification is when something is given human characteristics that's not human. And onomatopoeia is sound words. Occasionally, we will run across in this story an idiom, and I'll point that out as well. Idiom is an expression that's used commonly that everyone knows what it means. So I'm going to go ahead and get to it. This is Pecos Bill. It doesn't really have a whole lot of pictures, so I'm just going to ask you to get the pictures in your mind. Ask any coyote near the Pecos River in western Texas who was the best cowboy who ever lived, and he'll throw back his head and howl. Ah-hoo! If you didn't know already, that's coyote language for Pecos Bill. When Pecos Bill was a little baby, he was as tough as pine knot. He teased on horseshoes instead of teething rings and played with grizzly bears instead of teddy bears. He could have grown up just fine in the untamed land of eastern Texas, but one day his pappy ran in from the fields a hollerin', "Pack up, Ma! Neighbors moving in 50 miles away. Getting too crowded." Before sundown, Bill's folks loaded their 15 kids and all their belongings into their covered wagon and started west. As they clattered across the desolate land of western Texas, the crushing heat nearly drove them all crazy. Baby Bill got so hot and cross that he began to wallop his big brothers. Pretty soon, all 15 kids were going at one another, tooth and nail. That's an idiom, tooth and nail. Before they turned each other into catfish bait, Bill fell out of the wagon and landed kerplop on the sun-scorched desert. The others were so busy fighting that they didn't even notice the baby was missing until it was too late to do anything about it. Well, tough little Bill just sat there in the dirt watching his family rattle off in a cloud of dust until an old coyote walked over and sniffed him. "Goo goo," said little Bill. Now, it's an amazing coincidence, but goo goo happens to mean something similar to glad to meet you in coyote language. Naturally, the old coyote figured he'd come across one of his own kind. He gave Bill a big lick and picked him up by the scruff of the neck and carried him home to his den. Bill soon discovered the coyote's kinfolks were about the wildest, roughest bunch you could imagine. Before he knew it, he was roaming the prairies with the pack. He howled at the moon, sniffed at the brush, and chased lizards across the sand. He was having such a good time scuttling about naked and dirty on all fours, he completely forgot what it was like to be a human. Pecos Bill's coyote days came to an end about 17 years later. One evening, as he was sniffing the sagebrush, a cowpoke came loping on by on a big horse. "Hey, you!" he shouted. "What in the world are you?" Bill sat on his haunches and stared at the feller. "What are you?" asked the cowpoke again. "Varmint," said Bill hoarsely, for he hadn't used his human voice in 17 years. "No, you ain't." "Yeah, I am. Got fleas, don't I?" "Well, that don't mean nothing. A lot of Texans have fleas. The thing varmint's got that you ain't got is a tail." "Oh, yes, I do have a tail," said Pecos Bill. "Well, let me see it then," said the cowpoke. Bill turned around to look at his rear end, and for the first time in his life, he realized he didn't have a tail. "Dang," he said, "but if I'm not a varmint, what am I?" "You're a cowboy, so start acting like one." Bill just growled at the feller like any coyote worth his salt. But deep down in his heart of hearts, he knew the cowpoke was right. Both of those are idioms. Deep down in his heart of hearts, and worth his salt was an idiom. For the last 17 years, he'd had a sneaking suspicion that he was different from that pack of coyotes. For one thing, None of them seemed to smell quite as bad as he did. So with a heavy heart, he said goodbye to his four-legged friends and took off with the cowpoke for the nearest ranch. Acting like a human wasn't all that easy for Pecos Bill. Even though he soon started dressing right, he never bothered to shave or comb his hair. He'd just throw some water on his face in the morning and go around the rest of the day looking like a wet dog. Ignorant cowpokes claimed Bill wasn't too smart. Some of the meaner ones liked to joke that he wore a $10 hat on a 5-cent head, an expression that means he was not smart. The truth was, Pecos Bill would soon prove to be one of the greatest cowboys who ever lived. He just needed to find the kind of folks who appreciate him. One night, when he was licking his dinner plate, his ears perked up. A couple of ranch hands were going on about a gang of wild cowboys. Yep, those folks are more animal than human, one ranch hand was saying. Yep, them's the toughest bunch I ever come across. Heck, they're so tough, they can kick fire out of flint rock with their bare toes. Yep, and they like to bite nails in half for fun. Those are huge exaggerations. Nobody can kick a rock and make a flame come out of it. Who are these fellers? Asked Bill. The Hell's Gate gang, said the ranch hand. The mangiest, meanest, most low-down bunch of low-life varmints that ever grew hair. Sounds like my kind of folks, said Bill, and before anyone could holler, whoa, he jumped on his horse and took off for Hell's Gate Canyon. Bill hadn't gone far when disaster struck. His horse stepped in a hole and broke its ankle. Dang, said Bill as he stumbled up from the spill. He draped that lame critter around his neck and hurried on. After he'd walked about 100 more miles, Bill heard some mean rattling. Then a 50-foot rattlesnake reared up its ugly head and stuck out its long forked tongue ready to fight. Knock it off, you scaly-sided fool. I'm in a hurry, Bill said. The snake didn't give a spit for Bill's plans. He just rattled on. Before the cussed varmint could strike, Bill had no choice but to knock him cross-eyed. Hey, feller, he said, holding up the dazed snake, I like your spunk. Come go with us. And then he wrapped that rattler around his arm and continued on his way. After Bill had hiked another 100 miles with his horse around his neck and his snake around his arm, he heard a terrible growl. A huge mountain lion was crouching on a cliff, getting ready to leap on top of him. Don't jump, you mangy, bob-tailed flea bag, Bill said. Well, call any mountain lion a mangy, bob-tailed flea bag and he'll jump on your back for sure. After this one leaped onto Bill, so much fur began to fly that it darkened the sky. Bill wrestled that mountain lion into a headlock and squeezed him so tight the cat had to cry uncle. Cry uncle is an idiom, and the cat crying is personification. When the embarrassed old critter started to slink off, Bill felt sorry for him. Oh, come on, you big silly, he said. You're more like me than most humans I meet. He saddled up the cat, jumped on his back, and the four of them headed for the canyon. Ain't nobody putting a saddle on a mountain lion. Headed for the canyon with the mountain lion screeching, the horse neighing, the rattler rattling, and Pecos Bill hollering a wild war whoop. When the Hell's Gate gang heard those noises coming from the prairie, they nearly fainted. They dropped their dinner plates and their faces turned as white as bleached desert bones. Their knees knocked and their 6 guns shook. Hey there, Bill said as he sidled up to their campfire grinning. Who's boss around here? A 9-foot feller with 10 pistols by his side stepped forward and in a shaky voice said, Stranger, I was, but from now on it'll be you. Well, thank you, partner, said Bill. Get on with your dinner, boys. Don't let me interrupt. Once Bill settled down with the Hell's Gate gang, his true genius revealed itself. With the gang's help, he put together the biggest ranch in the Southwest. He used New Mexico as a corral and Arizona as a pasture. He invented tarantulas and scorpions as practical jokes. He also invented roping, and some say his rope was exactly as long as the equator. Others argue it was 2 feet shorter. Things were going fine for Bill until Texas began to suffer the worst drought in its history. It was so dry that all the rivers turned as powdery as biscuit flour. The parched grass was catching fire everywhere. For a while, Bill and his gang managed to lasso water from the Rio Grande. When that river dried up, they lassoed water from the Gulf of Mexico. You can't lasso water. It's got to be a hyperbole. Yeah. No matter what he did, though, Bill couldn't get enough water to stay ahead of the drought. All his horses and cows were starting to dry up and blow away like balls of tumbleweed. The end of it was a simile. It was horrible. Just when the end seemed near, the sky turned a deep shade of purple. From the distant mountains came a terrible roar. The cattle began to stampede, and a huge black funnel of a cyclone appeared, heading straight for Bill's ranch. The rest of Hell's Gate gang shouted, "Help!" and ran. But Pecos Bill wasn't scared in the least. "Yahoo!" he hollered, and he swung his lariat and lassoed that cyclone around its neck. Bill held on tight as he got sucked up into the middle of that swirling cloud. He grabbed the cyclone by the ears and pulled himself onto her back. And that's a little bit of personification because Twister does not have any ears. Then he let out a whoop that headed that Twister across Texas. The mighty cyclone bucked and arched and screamed like a wild bronco. But Pecos Bill just held on with his legs and used his strong hands to wring the rain out of her wind. He wrung out that rain that flooded Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona until finally he slid off that shriveled up funnel and fell into California. The earth sank about 200 feet below sea level in the spot where Bill landed, creating the area known today as Death Valley. "There, that little watering should hold things for a while," he said, brushing himself off. After his cyclone ride, no horse was too wild for Pecos Bill. He soon found a young colt that was as tough as a tiger and crazy as a streak of lightning. He named the colt Widowmaker and raised him on barbed wire and dynamite. Whenever the two rode together, they backflipped and somersaulted all over Texas, loving every minute of it. One day, when Bill and Widowmaker were bouncing around the Pecos River, they came across an awesome sight. A wild-looking red-haired woman riding on the back of the biggest catfish Wild Bill had ever seen. The woman looked like she was having a ball, screeching, "Ride cowgirl," as the catfish whipped her around in the air. Yes, sir? There probably is a lot of alliteration, but while I was reading it, I was too interested in the story to focus too much on finding the alliteration. But there probably is. There probably is a lot of it. In fact, this name right here, the little girl's getting ready to tell her his name, that would be alliteration. "What's your name?" Bill shouted. "Slewfoot Sue." "Yeah. What's it to you?" she said. Then she whooped away over the windy water. There's some more. Thereafter, all Pecos Bill could think of was Slewfoot Sue. He spent more and more time away from the Hell's Gate gang as he wandered the barren cattle lands looking for her. When he finally found her lonely little cabin, he was so love-struck he reverted to some of his old coyote ways. He sat on his haunches in the moonlight and began a howling and a hooing. Well, the good news was that Sue had a bit of coyote in her, too, so she completely understood Bill's language. She stuck her head out her window and ahooed back to him that she loved him, too. Consequently, Bill and Sue decided to get married. On the day of the wedding, Sue wore a beautiful white dress with a steel spring bustle, and Bill appeared in an elegant buckskin suit. Now, a steel spring bustle, boys might not understand. In girls' fancy dresses, the ones that stick out like way far all the way around, there's stuff under there that makes them not like deflate. And in this girl's dress, it was metal rings underneath her dress, making it stick out all pretty. But after a lovely ceremony, a terrible catastrophe occurred. Slewfoot Sue got it into her head that she just had to have a ride on Wild Bill's wild bronco Widowmaker. "You can't do that, honey," Bill said. "He won't let any human toss a leg over him but me." "Don't worry," said Sue. "You know I can ride anything on four legs, not to mention what flies or swims." Bill tried his best to talk Sue out of it. She wouldn't listen. She was dying to buck on the back of that bronco, wearing her white wedding dress with the bustle. She jumped on Widowmaker and kicked him with her spurs. Now, dying to ride on him, that's an idiom. She's not actually dying. She just wants to really bad. Well, that Bronco didn't need any thorns in his side to start bucking to beat the band. He bounded up in the air with such amazing force that suddenly Sue was flying high into the Texas sky. She flew over the plains and mesas, over canyons, deserts, and prairies. She flew so high that she looped over the new moon and fell back to Earth. But when Sue landed on her steel spring bustle, she rebounded right back into the heavens. As she bounced back and forth between heaven and earth, Bill whirled his lariat above his head and then lassoed her. But instead of bringing Sue back down to earth, he got yanked into the night sky alongside her. Together, Pecos Bill and Slewfoot Sue bounced off of the earth and went flying to the moon. And at that point, Bill must have gotten some sort of foothold in a moon crater because neither he nor Sue returned to earth, not ever. Folks figure those two must have dug their boot heels into some moon cheese and raised a pack of wild coyotes just like themselves. Texans will tell you that every time you hear thunder rolling over the desolate land near the Pecos River, it's just Bill's family having a good laugh upstairs. And when you hear a strange ahooing in the dark night, don't be fooled. It's the sound of Bill howling on the moon instead of at the moon. And when lights flash across the midnight sky, you can bet it's Bill and Sue riding the backs of some white hot shooting stars. That was the story of Pecos Bill. Now, I hope you're paying attention as I was showing you where all of this figurative language was, because I'm going to make a little bit quiz, and I'm going to use the words in my story that I just showed you. Ooh, there's a cool picture. I'm going to use some of the words in the story that I showed you and asked what were those things. So hopefully this will help you get a A+ on my quiz. See you later.